Hey guys, tonight we're diving into the heart of one of the most intricate, disciplined, and awe-inspiring civilizations the world has ever known, Imperial China. Spanning more than 2 millennia, it shaped the course of human thought, warfare, governance, art, and innovation. But be careful not to idealize it too soon, because while the Forbidden City may look like something out of a dream from a distance, life inside its walls was far from a fairy tale. So, before we get too cozy, I'd love it if you hit that like button and consider subscribing, but only if you truly enjoy this kind of storytelling. Drop a comment below with where you're watching from and what time it is there. It's always amazing to see our global community coming together. Now, lower the lights, maybe let a gentle fan hum in the background, and let yourself sink into the world we're about to explore. Our journey begins right now.
Welcome to the world of Imperial China, where existence was meticulously predefined from the moment of birth. Imagine a rigid societal structure, much like a towering, multi-layered confection. Yet you occupy the most humble, aged bottom tier, perpetually deprived of the luxurious frosting that never quite reaches you. At the apex resides the emperor. Revered as the Son of Heaven, a magnificent designation that, upon closer inspection, offers no recourse for grievances to the celestial realm. The emperor's authority and the social hierarchy. The emperor's authority stemmed from the mandate of heaven, a divine decree contingent on prosperity and tranquility. As long as harvests flourished and rebellions remained dormant, his sacred status was unassailable. However, should misfortune strike, it signaled heaven's disapproval, paving the way for a new dynastic succession. Directly beneath the emperor were the scholar officials, erudite men who devoted their lives to mastering Confucian doctrines. Their days were spent reciting philosophical tenets unsolicited, often cultivating a stoop from years hunched over bamboo scrolls and an ingrained sense of intellectual superiority. Their entry into this elite class was through the imperial exams, a formidable academic gauntlet akin to modern standardized tests, but with the dire consequence of perpetual poverty for those who faltered. The working classes and societal outcasts. Next in line were the farmers, the sun-weathered, often undernourished, yet indispensable foundation of society. Confucian philosophy paradoxically held them in high regard, acknowledging their crucial role in sustaining the empire. Regrettably, this respect did not translate into access to basic amenities like dental care or leisurely breaks. Following them were the artisans, skilled craftspeople who painstakingly produced essential goods. Paper, porcelain, fans, and countless other useful items. While their contributions were undeniable, their societal standing was considerably lower. Yet, even they held a slight advantage over merchants. These individuals, despite often possessing significant wealth, were generally distrusted. Confucian principles viewed profiting from the labor of others as morally questionable. Thus, a merchant, even adorned in sumptuous silks and dripping with silver, might still be perceived with the same disdain as a common swindler. The lowest rungs of society and women's position. The societal basement housed soldiers, servants, butchers, actors, and criminals, essentially anyone considered undesirable company at a formal gathering. Monks occupied a curious gray area, hovering between revered holy figures and those whose unconventional appearance raised public eyebrows. And finally, women, they weren't even integrated into the hierarchical pyramid, but rather viewed as the very gravel surrounding its base. Their lives were dictated by strict obedience, first to their fathers, then to their husbands, with the primary expectation of bearing sons who would, in turn, perpetuate the cycle of male subservience. If you harbored aspirations of pursuing personal dreams in Imperial China, society's resounding response was likely a dismissive, "How quaint." Now, back to your designated duties. A day in the life. Morning rituals. Your day in Imperial China commenced with the cacophony of a crowing rooster and the insistent clamor of the village bell, as if attempting to rouse the spirits of the departed. Upon awakening, you would immediately be reminded that simply existing was not an option. The first order of business was to bow, not to some abstract deity, but to your father, then your mother, your grandparents, and potentially even your great-aunt if she was still among the living. This was the essence of filial piety, a deeply ingrained and obligatory practice. Neglecting to bow was not merely impolite, it was an egregious act inviting cosmic disgrace upon 7 generations of your lineage. And this was not a single, perfunctory bow. You would bow upon waking, before meals, and even if an elder merely coughed in your vicinity. If you weren't performing at least 6 bows before breakfast, one might question your adherence to cultural norms. Navigating social etiquette and family authority. Imagine inadvertently speaking out of turn during morning tea, perhaps innocently inquiring, "Must I truly wash uncle's feet?" Congratulations, you've just committed an act of unfilial conduct, a transgression barely less severe than public arson in terms of social opprobrium. You would then be expected to deliver a heartfelt apology, potentially involving multiple prostrations and touching your forehead to the ground. Even the furniture, had it been present, would seem to silently condemn you. Most households lacked chairs unless they were exceptionally affluent, meaning you'd likely be kneeling on woven mats. Attempting to maintain your posture while your elders delivered lengthy monologues, some 45 minutes in duration, on the virtues of respect, discipline, and the perceived decline of the world since the last dynasty. The unspoken rules of Confucian hierarchy. The Confucian hierarchy chart served as the unspoken blueprint dictating who held precedence in conversation, seating, and even breathing. Age trumped youth, men outranked women, and fathers superseded all others. Even among siblings, older ones held the privilege of interrupting younger ones. If you were the youngest, your role was typically to nod, smile, and fervently hope you wouldn't be blamed for someone else's missteps. There was no casual "good morning" in imperial China, instead. It was a succession of elaborate, respectful rituals, accompanied by a quiet prayer that you wouldn't inadvertently offend someone and face ostracization. After approximately 47 bows before 7 a.m., you had successfully navigated the day's opening ceremony. Now, it was time for breakfast, the most crucial meal of the day. Designed to reinforce the notion that life was inherently a struggle. Breakfast, a Spartan affair. So, what was on the menu? Typically, a steaming bowl of rice gruel. Also known as congee, a rather euphemistic term for warm, watery nothingness. It was prepared by boiling rice until it surrendered its form and transformed into a thin soup. If you were fortunate, a hint of salt might be present. If truly blessed, a solitary sliver of pickled vegetable might drift by, like a fleeting, elusive carp. For most families who resided on the poorer end of the economic spectrum, this bowl of congee offered about as much excitement as their social prospects. You consumed it silently, respectfully, under the unspoken scrutiny of at least one grandparent who recalled a time when even gruel was a luxury. Meat was an extreme rarity, reserved for festivals, weddings, or the tables of imperial officials who had long forgotten the sight of a rice paddy. Eggs were a possibility, but often preserved in salt or ash until they resembled fossilized sorrow. The appearance of pork belly would immediately prompt a mental check for visiting relatives or an act of divine intervention. Tea was, of course, served, not for leisure, but because plain water was considered suspect. Tea, having been boiled, was statistically less likely to cause illness. You would sip it slowly, even as your stomach quietly questioned when the actual meal was scheduled to begin. Dining etiquette and ancestral reverence. Meals were not occasions for conversation. Discussions about dreams, aspirations, or late-night anxieties over the imperial exams were strictly forbidden. You ate facing the ancestral shrine, silently expressing gratitude to your forefathers. Even if their legacy was a thatched roof, chronic anemia, and an unending cascade of impossible family expectations. The bowls were crudely fashioned ceramic, the spoons carved from wood. Napkins were non-existent, you would simply wipe your mouth with your sleeve if it was sufficiently clean. And then, it was time to prepare for the day's toil. Working off a meal that offered minimal sustenance. As you rose, your father would offer a curt nod, eat quickly. Heaven favors the diligent. This essentially translated to, get back to work. We have dynasties to uphold. Having consumed your bowl of existential porridge, it was time to dress, not for display, but to avoid fines, floggings, or being mistaken for a social class above your station. In imperial China, attire was not a medium for self-expression, it was a matter of survival. The fabric of society. Clothing and footwear. Let's delve into the fabric hierarchy. Were you a farmer? Then hemp was your lot, coarse, itchy, and perpetually scratchy. The medieval equivalent of wearing a potato sack steeped in disappointment. Were you a noble? Then silk, glorious, shimmering silk that flowed like poetry and subtly whispered, tax the peasants more. And here's the crucial point, being caught in the wrong fabric wasn't merely a fashion faux pas, it was a punishable offense. Clothing was not just about comfort, it was law. The government meticulously regulated sleeve width, hat shape, belt ornaments, and even color. Yellow, for instance, was reserved exclusively for the emperor. For a commoner to wear yellow was not to initiate a fashion trend, it was to initiate your own execution. Foot binding and the unseen constraints. Now, let's discuss footwear. Cloth shoes for peasants. Exquisitely embroidered silk slippers for the elite. Practicality was optional, comfort unlikely. You dressed not for the climate, but for the dynasty. And then, there were the feet themselves. Specifically foot binding, the aesthetic practice of molding toes into a tightly curled, hidden secret. If you were a highborn girl, your feet would be broken, folded underneath, and tightly bound from the tender age of 5. Why? Because tiny, deformed feet, known as lotus feet, were considered the epitome of beauty. A woman's worth was literally gauged by her ability to hobble across a room with grace, without succumbing to a fall. It was not merely agonizing, it was a permanent disfigurement. Foot binding crippled generations of women, transforming the act of walking into a painful, stylized performance. But rest assured, at least you got to wear those ornate embroidered shoes that no one ever truly saw, since extensive walking was no longer an option. Male attire and the political statement of clothing. Even men were not spared sartorial misery. Bureaucrats endured heavy, layered robes year-round, even in the sweltering summer. Because status always superseded personal comfort. Some official garments even featured winged hat flaps. Strategically designed to prevent officials from engaging in whispered conversations during court proceedings. Thus, imperial Chinese fashion, while undoubtedly elegant and symbolic, was also deeply political. It chafed, pinched, caused overheating, or in some cases, outright shattered bones. Beauty is pain, they say, but here, pain was mandated. And beauty was a government-approved dress code. The relentless grind of labor. You are now properly attired in your socially acceptable potato fiber tunic. Excellent. Time to venture out and earn your daily calories, assuming the land, weather, and tax collectors permit it. Let's be frank, in imperial China, work was not a vocation. It was an interminable endurance test, seemingly devised by Confucius and enforced by individuals who had never lifted a shovel in their lives. If you were a farmer, which statistically you almost certainly were, your entire life would be spent bent over a rice paddy. Not in some romantic, cinematic tableau, but in literal, backbreaking labor. You would awaken before dawn, plant seedlings knee-deep in mud, swat away mosquitoes the size of small birds, and fervently pray that the landlord would not increase your grain tax again this year. Rain? You worked. Drought? You worked harder. Locusts? You worked and simultaneously screamed at the heavens. Your tools were rudimentary, a wooden plow if you were fortunate. Your bare hands if you were not. Your ox was both your most loyal companion and your sole retirement plan. Losing him meant facing 10 acres of despair alone. Women's burdens and other occupations. Now, consider if you were a woman. Your workload had a sequel. You would assist in the fields, cook, clean, spin thread, weave fabric, raise children. And somehow still be held accountable if dinner was delayed or your husband merely sneezed incorrectly. Rest? That was an indulgence reserved for noblewomen while they engaged in poetic debates. Artisans fared little better. They toiled for hours, meticulously crafting pottery, paper, or tools by hand, only to sell their creations for barely enough to afford stale tofu. And merchants, though technically wealthier, faced constant social scorn. You could acquire half the village and still be treated as a walking moral failing. Corvée labor and the absence of freedom. Then there was corvée labor, government-mandated service. One day, the emperor might decree the construction of a new road, canal, or tomb. Guess who would be compelled to contribute their labor freely, with a smile, and without shoes? Refusal would brand you a criminal, or worse, a rebel. And at the end of it all, you would trudge home, covered in dirt, to a bowl of thin porridge and the quiet satisfaction of merely surviving the day. In imperial China, work did not offer liberation. It merely kept you too exhausted to contemplate rebellion. The imperial examination system, the grand conduit to social mobility, or more accurately, China's perennial written torture chamber. If you were a man born with a flicker of ambition and a family marginally wealthier than outright destitution, your life's trajectory was unequivocally laid out. The imperial examination. A grueling path to power. To successfully navigate the civil service examination meant ascending to the esteemed rank of an official, a position imbued with respect, authority, and the luxury of silk robes and actual chairs. Failure, however, meant a swift return to the rice paddies, forever condemned to a peasant's existence. This wasn't a simple multiple-choice test. It demanded the verbatim memorization of the entire Confucian canon and the composition of poetic essays so profound they could move a 1,000-year-old spirit to tears. Your evaluation extended beyond mere grammar and meaning. Your handwriting had to possess the flowing grace of a virtuous river. A single smudge, a misplaced character, or a metaphor deemed too audacious resulted in immediate disqualification. The unwavering pursuit of knowledge. The arduous journey of study commenced in early childhood and persisted until one's hairline receded. Young boys would cram into frigid study huts or swelter in the summer heat, relentlessly scribbling essays until their fingers permanently curved into brush-holding claws. Tutors relentlessly hammered doctrines into their minds, akin to academic blacksmiths forging knowledge. Social life was non-existent, hobbies were synonymous with Confucian texts. And even dreams revolved around the very same philosophy. The pinnacle of these exams, the Jinshe, was administered in the capital. Candidates were confined to cubicles no larger than coffins. Equipped only with paper, ink, and soul-crushing anxiety. They brought their own sustenance, blankets, and chamber pots. Some examinees succumbed to fainting, others descended into madness. And a grim few even perished from the sheer pressure, with no partial credit awarded for their ultimate sacrifice. Even successfully navigating the initial round meant facing further examinations at the district, provincial, and national levels. Years, even decades, could elapse. Some men continued to test into their 60s, one individual reportedly took the exam over 40 times, a testament not to mere determination, but to a profound trauma wielded with a calligraphy pen. The stigma of failure. Failure carried immense social shame. Families, who had sacrificed everything for their son's education, would voice their profound disappointment. Neighbors would engage in hushed whispers. Mothers might shed tears, and fathers would cast that infamous, "Why weren't you born smarter?" glare. Thus, the examination system possessed the power to elevate individuals to greatness or to shatter their minds, bodies, and familial lineage. All for the chance to be overworked, underpaid, and meticulously managed by palace eunuchs. Was it worth it? That, perhaps, was a question best posed to Confucius himself. Personal hygiene, a seasonal suggestion. Feeling somewhat unkempt yet? Don't fret, you soon will. In imperial China, personal hygiene was less a lifestyle choice and more a sporadic suggestion. Let's start with the fundamentals: bathing. It occurred intermittently. Perhaps once every few weeks if you were fortunate enough not to be freezing to death. In summer, a refreshing dip in the river was plausible. In winter, however, a month without a proper wash was not uncommon. And no, there was no fragrant lavender-scented soap. When used, soap was a gritty concoction of animal fat and ashes, feeling more like exfoliating with pure misery. Public bathhouses did exist, especially in larger urban centers, but privacy was a foreign concept. You'd find yourself scrubbing your armpits alongside an elderly merchant and a screaming toddler, while a monk intoned hygiene proverbs in a corner. Oral care and unwanted companions. For a refreshing toothpaste, one might try salt, charcoal, or powdered bones. Toothbrushes were fashioned from animal hair attached to bamboo. Effective only if your aim was to mildly dislodge plaque into a new location. Dental hygiene was generally poor, which likely accounts for the prevalence of haunted, jack-o'-lantern-like smiles among older adults. And then there were the parasites: lice, fleas, bed bugs. These weren't mere pests, they were more akin to ubiquitous housemates. Regardless of your wealth, if you possessed hair, you harbored company. Comb shops thrived, as everyone required a lice comb. And those who didn't would scratch their scalps as if attempting to summon lightning. Clothing and public facilities. Clothing offered no reprieve. The same outfit would be worn for weeks on end. Washing clothes demanded the arduous task of hauling water, boiling it, hand scrubbing, and praying your garment wouldn't disintegrate. Underwear existed, but wasn't a daily necessity. Especially for peasants who frequently went without, a risky endeavor indeed. And let's not dwell on the toilets, or perhaps, for your own sanity, do. A typical toilet was simply a hole in the ground, occasionally framed by wooden boards for those with a touch more refinement. Public latrines functioned in the same unsettling manner as a haunted well, malodorous, crowded, and perpetually on the brink of biological catastrophe. Imperial China boasted silk, philosophy, poetry, and palatial residences. However, if you longed for a long, hot, private shower, you were approximately 1,500 years too early. Imperial justice, a terrifying enforcement. So, you've endured the lice, the breakfast disappointment, and the soul-crushing exam preparation. But before you even consider voicing a complaint to your neighbor, remember that in Imperial China, the law was a constant, vigilant observer. And unlike modern surveillance, this oversight came with bamboo sticks and remarkably inventive punishments. Let's begin with the legal code. Imperial dynasties, particularly during the Tang and Qing periods, were renowned for their meticulously detailed laws. There were regulations governing taxes, hairstyles, hat shapes, the proper way to grieve, and even the permissible duration of mourning for your in-laws. Accidentally wearing the wrong color on an improper festival day was technically a criminal offense. And yes, they maintained records, official bamboo strip documents, painstakingly inked and filed by overworked scribes who likely loathed their profession. Punishments and torture as procedure. Punishment was not subtle. Forget modern courtrooms and community service. Imperial justice subscribed to the principle of education through suffering. For minor infractions, you might receive a flogging with a bamboo rod. Interestingly, the courts even possessed different sizes of sticks depending on the nature of the transgression. A light insult warranted a small stick, stealing a chicken merited a larger one, and failing to bow deeply enough to a magistrate's horse might result in a surprising stick combination. For more serious crimes, the escalation was swift. You could be branded, your crime tattooed onto your face, sent into exile, or, if you truly provoked someone of importance, executed publicly and slowly. Torture was not an exception, it was standard procedure. If you were accused of something, the court would often employ methods to encourage a confession, thumbscrews, kneeling on spiked boards, or prolonged hours in a stress position while being harangued by a humorless man with a scroll. And here's the most chilling part, you didn't even need to be guilty. Merely being suspicious, inconvenient, or politically unlucky was enough. Even your family could be held accountable, the law embraced collective punishment. If your cousin uttered something seditious during a rice wine binge, you might awaken to find your home under investigation, for guilt, it seemed, was hereditary. The law was structured, advanced, and utterly terrifying. Justice in Imperial China was less about fairness and more about unwavering obedience. The message was unmistakable: behave, respect the established order, and whatever you do, avoid eye contact with the magistrate's concubine. The pre-trial icebreaker, imperial torture. Welcome to the imperial justice system's preferred hobby, torture. Not as a punishment, but as a convenient pre-trial icebreaker. Let's imagine you're accused of stealing a chicken, disrespecting your father, or, heaven forbid, voicing a controversial opinion about the emperor's poetry. The magistrate doesn't begin by soliciting your side of the story. No, this is Imperial China. You commence by being bound to a bench while they unveil the confession toolkit. First up, the bamboo rod, employed to beat your back, buttocks, or thighs until you regret transgressions you may not even comprehend. This wasn't random brutality, official punishment logs meticulously recorded every stroke with bureaucratic precision. 30 lashes for theft, 45 for lying, and a bonus lash for squirming. Still denying guilt? Time for an upgrade. Kneeling on spiked boards was a classic. You would kneel on rough wood embedded with stones or glass until your legs collapsed or your will broke. It was a bit like yoga, if yoga had been conceived by irate civil servants. Then there was the finger crusher, 2 wooden slabs tightened with rope around your fingers. Amusingly, it was dubbed the small tiger bench. A deceptively charming name until your bones fractured like kindling. While difficult to write a confession with broken fingers, penmanship was not a primary concern. And yes, this was standard practice. Torture wasn't viewed as morally questionable, it was simply considered the most efficient method for extracting the truth. Or at least a version of it that aligned with the official narrative. If you persisted in your denial, they would simply escalate the torment. Some punishments involved being stretched, whipped, or left bound under the scorching summer sun while officials took a lunch break. Don't bother screaming, the neighbors were accustomed to it. The unseen eye, imperial surveillance. Now, imagine you're innocent. Congratulations, you'd still be tortured, because a clean confession was essential for proper record keeping. Better to admit to something than risk being labeled uncooperative, imperial logic at its finest. So, the next time you grumble about modern bureaucracy, remember that at least the DMV doesn't beat you with bamboo until you confess to improper parking in 1372. You might believe you're alone, but in Imperial China, someone was always observing. And no, it wasn't just your judgmental grandmother. The surveillance state wasn't digital, it was profoundly human, meticulously trained, state-sanctioned, and terrifyingly comprehensive. It began at the village level, where every town possessed a local baojia or village elder who wasn't merely there to distribute rice. He was also your friendly neighborhood informant. Your neighbors. Also spies. Your extended family? Absolutely spies. Your servant, who claimed to be illiterate and deaf? Definitely a spy. Eunuchs and the culture of silence. People were incentivized to report suspicious behavior. And suspicious could encompass anything from hoarding excessive grain to coughing during a tribute speech. Even maintaining too much quiet could raise eyebrows. What are you concealing, citizen? In urban centers, a sophisticated network of yamen runners, scribes, and magistrate assistants were tasked with investigating crimes, delivering messages, and casually observing your every action. Every dynasty implemented its own iteration of this intricate machine, but the objective remained consistent: maintain peace by peering through every available crack. Particularly fond of surveillance were the eunuchs in the imperial palace, those castrated courtiers who, despite being unable to father children, were perfectly capable of orchestrating coups. Many commanded their own secret police forces, operated elaborate spy rings, and whispered crucial information into the ears of emperors. Some eunuchs wielded more influence than ministers. Simply by knowing who said what to whom, and when. And don't even consider criticizing the system. Indirectly criticizing the emperor, such as remarking, "The sun appears a bit weary today," could be interpreted as slander. Poets learned to master the art of subtlety, everyone else simply mastered the art of silence. The pervasive eye of the state. What's more, the government frequently disseminated lists of executed criminals as a stark warning, complete with their names and transgressions. It was akin to an ancient social media feed, but with a significantly higher incidence of decapitations. Consequently, if a rebellious thought dared to flicker through your mind, you swiftly suppressed it. If you discovered a rebellious cousin, you were expected to report them. And if someone offered an overly broad smile while inquiring about your political leanings, that was your unequivocal signal to feign a cough and make a swift exit. For in imperial China, the walls possessed ears, as did the trees, your neighbors, and quite possibly even your humble rice bowl. Marriage, a transaction of duty. In imperial China, matrimony bore no resemblance to a romantic idyll beneath blooming cherry trees. It was a rigorous transaction rooted in duty, intricate negotiation, and dowries so substantial they could splinter the axle of your ox cart. Love, that ethereal concept, was reserved for poetry, not for the practicalities of human coupling. Let's begin with the fundamentals. Marriages were invariably arranged. Your parents determined your destiny while you were still mastering the art of wielding chopsticks. If your family possessed a modicum of social standing, they would enlist a matchmaker, a professional fact-finder who meticulously scrutinized horoscopes, ancestral records. And whether your prospective spouse's forebears had committed any embarrassing faux pas 5 dynasties prior. If all the stars aligned, congratulations. You were betrothed to someone you had likely never encountered. Physical attraction, personality congruence, shared interests, all were utterly irrelevant. Compatibility was meticulously measured by birth charts and tax ledgers. For women, marriage was not an exciting new chapter, it was a ceremonial abduction, albeit adorned with elaborate robes. You permanently severed ties with your birth family, adopted your husband's surname, and relocated to his household, where you were now expected to serve not only him, but also his parents, his grandparents, and any cranky uncle who happened to occupy the guest room. The dowry system mandated that your family dispatch money, goods, or land along with you, the more, the better. Consider it imperial China's version of a "thank you for taking her off our hands" gesture. In reciprocation, the groom's family might offer betrothal gifts, but temper your excitement. Sometimes this entailed silks and exquisite jewelry, other times, merely a slightly more respectable chicken. Wifely duties and concubinage. Once married, your role was unequivocally defined. Produce male heirs, obey your in-laws, and never, under any circumstances, speak back. A wife was expected to embody the Confucian trinity of womanhood, modesty, silence, and diligent labor. Should you prove too vociferous, too opinionated, or, heaven forbid, barren, you could be legally supplanted by a concubine. Speaking of which, yes, concubinage was a prevailing practice. Men, especially those of wealth, could acquire multiple concubines. For women, it was a singular opportunity for survival. Divorce was a rare and socially ruinous event. The only permissible grounds were the 7 outs, which included jealousy, debilitating disease, or excessive gossip. So, if your tea-drinking habit sufficiently irked your husband, he could legally cast you aside. Delightful. In essence, marriage in Imperial China was less about a blissful, happily ever after, and more about desperately trying to avoid exile for serving tepid noodles. Rebellion, a perilous endeavor. So, you're contemplating rebellion? Perhaps you've grown weary of backbreaking labor, incessant bowing, or that smug magistrate who taxed your rice and your dignity in the same afternoon. A daring move. Indeed. Unfortunately, in Imperial China, rebellion did not transform you into a hero, it merely ensured you became a very short-lived headline. Let's address the fantasy. You assemble a motley crew of peasants, incinerate your landlord's tax ledgers, and grandly declare a new era of justice. The inherent flaw? The imperial army arrives 3 days later. Armed with horses, crossbows, and a complete absence of humor. You see, emperors were not merely bureaucrats adorned with gold hats, they were fanatical about stability. Confucian ideology unequivocally taught that rebellion signified disorder, and disorder, in turn, signified a cosmic imbalance. This rendered you not merely a criminal, but a cosmic threat. And the retribution for cosmic threats was, to say the least, dramatic. You would be captured, publicly paraded, tortured, and frequently executed in a manner specifically designed to stifle any nascent creative thinking. Public beheadings were commonplace, as was quartering. One emperor favored slow slicing, a particularly charming technique where you were repeatedly cut until both your official paperwork and your torso were complete. And it didn't end with you. The imperial government reveled in collective punishment. Your family, your neighbors, even that unsuspecting individual who once loaned you a hoe, all were considered fair game. The rationale was disarmingly simple: if we eradicate your entire village, no one else will dare to rebel. Effective, yes, but terrifying. The harsh reality of uprisings. Despite the dire consequences, rebellions did periodically erupt. From the Yellow Turban Rebellion to the White Lotus Uprising, desperate individuals occasionally rose in defiance. While some ignited widespread chaos, most were brutally suppressed. The survivors were either enslaved, silenced, or conscripted into public works projects they would not live long enough to complete. Even merely discussing rebellion was fraught with peril. Penning a sassy poem hinting at discontent? Boom. Arrested. Within its walls, everyone smiled and plotted. Eunuchs, ministers, concubines, scholar officials, all ensnared in a perpetual game of polite betrayal. The only thing more cutthroat than court life was literal throat-cutting, an occurrence that was far from uncommon. If you were an official, your every movement was meticulously observed, not merely by spies, but by relentless rivals eagerly awaiting your misstep. File a report with an incorrect character wall, and someone might interpret it as veiled criticism of the emperor. Officials were executed for writing poems about the weather because the emperor took the hint personally. And when the emperor finally succumbed to death, then the true fun commenced. Succession disputes, clandestine wills, mysterious deaths, unfortunate illnesses, half the court often failed to survive the transition. So no, court life was not safer. It was merely death draped in silk. Your robe might be red, but so too was the floor beneath it. The anonymous cog in the imperial machine. You've made it this far, you've bowed, perhaps bled. committed 400 Confucian aphorisms to memory, and dodged at least 3 distinct forms of demise. But here is the overarching truth about life in Imperial China: you were a statistic, a headcount. A mere line item on a dusty tax ledger. To the empire, you were not an individual brimming with hopes and aspirations. You were a grain of rice, small, anonymous, easily crushed, and ideally harvested for labor or revenue. The state held no concern for your ambition, your talent, or your inner beauty. Its sole concern was whether your family remitted its taxes promptly and produced able-bodied sons to conscript into the next border defense project. From the emperor's vantage point, you were one infinitesimal speck among hundreds of millions, and not even a particularly glamorous one. You were not the gleaming imperial seal or a sacred relic. You were a moving component in a rice-producing, silk-spinning, canal-digging machine constructed to perpetuate dynastic continuity. Your birth was recorded not for celebration, but for future tax extraction. Your death was noted primarily so your family wouldn't continue attempting to claim your rations. And in between, your life's purpose was to simply not cause problems. Stay within the lines, fulfill your prescribed role, and endeavor not to starve during a drought. The collective over the individual. Individualism? A charming notion that simply did not exist. You did not pursue your passion, you followed your father, your master, or your assigned bureaucratic rank. The very idea of being unique, of standing out, was as threatening to the state as a crop blight or a Mongol invasion. Harmony was paramount. Even your emotions were expected to align with your social status. Feeling melancholy as a peasant? Acceptable. Feeling inspired? Sit down. The census did not inquire about your favorite poem, it asked if your roof leaked and whether you possessed a pig. Even your body belonged to the system. Conscripted for public works, you might be dispatched to construct a canal from which you would never benefit, or to guard a wall you would never see completed. Perish along the way? No matter. There were always more grains from where you originated. In Imperial China, you mattered, but only insofar as you could be counted, taxed, or quietly interred. The enduring legacy and harsh reality. So, here we are, 15 chapters deep. And if you've been attentive, one truth is abundantly clear: Imperial China was magnificent. And magnificently merciless. Yes, this civilization bequeathed to the world some of its most profound inventions: gunpowder, paper, the compass, printing, and a bureaucracy that, for the most part, functioned. The Great Wall snaked across mountains. The Forbidden City stood as a testament to imperial will, and poetry flowed like the Yellow River, beautiful, boundless, and often fatal if misinterpreted. Its legacy is unmatched. The reality, however, was backbreaking, rigidly hierarchical, and perpetually a single bad rice harvest away from collapse. For every elegant brushstroke meticulously recorded in a scholar's diary, there were 10,000 peasants ankle-deep in mud, agonizing over whether this year's tax grain would leave them with anything to eat. For every emperor interred beneath a mountain of jade and gold, hundreds of laborers lay buried beneath the same mountain because they were inconvenient witnesses. The sheer brilliance of Imperial China did not come cheaply. It was paid for in childhood sacrifice to exam study, backs broken from fieldwork, and lives abruptly curtailed by law, famine, or conscription. The all-pervasive system. This intricate system functioned brilliantly for the privileged few at the pinnacle. For the vast majority, however, it relentlessly exploited them until they were utterly broken. And perhaps the most unsettling aspect was that most people simply accepted it, not out of a fondness for oppression, but because the system had cunningly convinced them that this was the natural order of things. They were led to believe that heaven itself had ordained their emperor, that filial piety, obedience, and silence were cardinal virtues, and that quietly enduring suffering was a form of spiritual excellence. This enduring legacy, the stark duality of splendor and suffering, continues to reverberate even today. When individuals reflect on imperial China, their minds often conjure images of exquisite calligraphy, majestic architecture, and profound philosophical maxims etched into stone. They frequently overlook the concubine clandestinely poisoned in the harem, the starving mother desperately bartering her comb for a morsel of rice, or the scholar who, having failed the imperial examination for the 7th time, simply vanished without a trace. So no, you genuinely wouldn't survive a single day in imperial China. Not because you lack resilience, but because that world wasn't designed for individual survival in the modern sense. It was meticulously constructed for endurance, unwavering tradition, and absolute control. And yet, despite everything, the empire persisted. The people endured, though only a fraction of their narratives were ever committed to history. The ill-fated journey, the Donner Party. In the spring of 1846, the monumental westward migration was in full swing. The Oregon Trail hummed with vitality, oxen lumbering onward, wagon wheels groaning under their burdens, and families clutching dreams of fresh starts. Among this throng of hopeful travelers was a contingent of approximately 30 individuals, led by brothers George and Jacob Donner and the entrepreneur James F. Reed. They weren't reckless fortune seekers or audacious adventurers, they were farmers, artisans, mothers, by piece, and then laboriously reassembled. Their progress decelerated to an agonizing crawl. Tempers frayed, and dwindling supplies became a grave concern. The desperate crossing of the Great Salt Lake Desert. Then came the desert. The Great Salt Lake Desert was a brutal, shimmering purgatory. Hastings had confidently stated it would take 2 days to traverse, it consumed 5. Water barrels ran dry. Animals collapsed from exhaustion. Oxen succumbed to madness. Entire wagons were summarily abandoned in the alkaline dust. They had already squandered invaluable time. And winter was now ominously close behind them. By the time they finally reconnected with the main trail, weeks had been irretrievably lost. Other wagon trains had already surmounted the Sierra Nevada. The Donner Party, utterly exhausted and critically behind schedule, pressed onward, blissfully unaware that the most harrowing segment of their odyssey still lay before them. The idealized vision of California remained etched in their minds. But the indifferent mountains cared nothing for dreams. And soon, neither would the gnawing reality of starvation. Trapped by winter in the Sierra Nevada. By late October 1846, the Donner Party at last reached the eastern foothills of the Sierra Nevada mountains. This was meant to be the final formidable impediment before their descent into California's promised territories. Yet, these mountains were not merely towering, they were merciless, and winter was making an unseasonably early arrival. The party had by now fragmented. Some families had pressed ahead, while others, including the Donners and the Reeds, lagged significantly behind, hampered by broken wagons, injured oxen, and sheer physical depletion. Snow began to fall, initially a gentle dusting. Then a relentless onslaught. Within days, the mountain passes became utterly impassable. They were unequivocally trapped. They established encampments at Truckee Lake, now known as Donner Lake, while others halted further back at Alder Creek. Makeshift cabins were hastily constructed from pine logs and salvaged wagon components. They systematically slaughtered their remaining animals. Hides were crudely fashioned into rudimentary tents. The snow persisted, accumulating to over 6 feet, then 10. The onset of starvation. The gnawing specter of hunger swiftly materialized. Rations were drastically reduced. Their livestock was entirely depleted. They resorted to boiling strips of rawhide and gnawing on leather belts. One desperate child attempted to consume a blanket. Another chewed on a piece of tree bark until their gums bled profusely. Each dawn brought another frigid corpse. Death moved with a slow, polite, then relentlessly cruel pace. Inside those desolate cabins, there was no warmth, only the suffocating presence of smoke, hunger, and an oppressive silence. Mothers desperately attempted to comfort their starving children. Fathers stared blankly into the endless expanse of snow, grimly calculating how far they might possibly travel on foot. Arguments erupted. Hope, like the rarefied mountain air, grew thinner with each passing moment. On November 12, a ferocious blizzard sealed their fate. Snow piled up to the roofs of their makeshift shelters. Trees groaned and snapped under the immense weight. Any vestige of escape was buried beneath an impenetrable blanket of white silence. The pass was irrevocably closed. The dream of California was shattered, replaced by a singular, desperate imperative: survival. The Forlorn Hope Party. By mid-December, with no glimmer of rescue on the horizon, 15 of the strongest members formed what would become known as the Forlorn Hope Party. 10 men and 5 women strapped crude snowshoes to their feet and embarked on a perilous attempt to traverse the mountains on foot, carrying meager provisions and the unbearable psychological burden of what lay ahead. Behind them, dozens remained at the camps, succumbing to starvation, perishing, and languishing in a frozen purgatory. For the Forlorn Hope, the question was no longer if they would survive, it was who would die first, and who would consume them. On December 16, 1846, 15 desperate souls stepped into the unforgiving snow and vanished into the annals of history. They were christened the Forlorn Hope, not by newspapers, but by their fellow immigrants who watched them depart, fully cognizant of the word's grim connotations: lost, hopeless, doomed. Each member carried only what was absolutely essential: scraps of dried oxhide, flint, a single rifle, and tattered blankets. They fashioned rudimentary snowshoes, optimistically hoping to remain atop the deep drifts. But their efforts were largely in vain. The snow was powdery and seemingly endless. They slogged for miles each day, impeded by profound exhaustion and the icy grip of the high-altitude wilderness. Cannibalism, the ultimate desperation. Within days, they were hopelessly lost. Their meager food supply vanished almost immediately. They had grievously miscalculated the distances involved. A squirrel was miraculously caught. A pine cone was boiled in a desperate attempt at sustenance. And then, a man collapsed, Franklin Graves, the oldest member of the group. His daughters wept uncontrollably as he succumbed in the snow. There was nothing they could do. And then, one by one, others began to fall: Antonio, the Mexican teamster, Patrick Dolan. Raving and delirious, Lemuel Murphy, a mere 13-year-old. Death arrived not as a raging storm, but as a slow, pervasive hush, silent, white, inescapable. Then came the moment when the line of human decency was irrevocably crossed by an agonizing blend of desperation and cold, brutal logic. The survivors, driven to the absolute edge, carved meat from their fallen companions. They wept, they prayed, they vomited, and then they ate again. This was not an act of savagery, it was an exercise in grim calculus: starve or live. Sarah Graves, a mere 19-year-old, later recalled the first taste. She never uttered another word about it. William Foster, gaunt and silent, kept his horrifying thoughts to himself. Marion Graves clutched her sister's hand and whispered that it didn't matter what they were forced to do, as long as they made it home. By the time they stumbled out of the mountains weeks later, only 7 had survived, 5 women and 2 men. Their eyes were deeply sunken, their cheeks ravaged by frostbite, their mouths sealed in a chilling silence. Yet, they brought something far more potent than mere supplies or maps: they brought news. Dozens were still alive, trapped at Donner Lake, starving, freezing, waiting, and they needed immediate assistance. California, which had largely dismissed the Donner Party's plight, suddenly awakened to the horror. The magnitude of the suffering was too immense, the potential shame too profound. The rescue efforts and unspeakable discoveries Rescue parties were swiftly organized, but by the time they reached the trapped pioneers, the snow had deepened even further. And in the cabins by the lake, what they were about to discover defied all imagination. The first rescue party arrived at Donner Lake in February 1847. 2 agonizing months after the forlorn hope emerged from the mountains. What they encountered was not a camp, it was a graveyard. Guys discovered fewer survivors, and unearthed darker, more horrifying narratives. The truth began to seep out, not merely of starvation, but of cannibalism. Of how, during the darkest nights, when all hope seemed extinguished, some survivors had resorted to feeding on the dead. Some even whispered chilling rumors that others had killed to ensure their own survival. Names were guarded closely, but the rumors echoed louder than the facts. Some were judged, others pitied. Most were simply too profoundly traumatized to utter a single word. James Reed, who had been banished early in the journey for killing a man in self-defense, returned as a rescuer. Against all odds. He discovered his wife and children still alive. George Donner, however, lay dying at Alder Creek, his arm gangrenous. His devoted wife, Tamsin, steadfastly refused to abandon him. She remained behind when the others departed and never made it out of the mountains. When the final survivors at last reached California in April 1847, the immediate ordeal was over. But the scars, emotional, cultural, and historical, were just beginning to fester. News of the Donner Party's harrowing ordeal spread eastward like an uncontrolled wildfire. Twisting with each retelling, growing progressively darker and more grotesque. Newspapers couldn't satiate their readers' appetite for the gruesome details. America, then consumed by the fervent ideology of manifest destiny, was suddenly confronted with its own dark reflection. The story was simply too irresistible. Pioneers chasing paradise transformed into cannibals amidst the snow. Some headlines shrieked of the cannibal horror of the Sierra. Others unreservedly accused survivors of murder. Who had consumed whom? Who had endured a noble death, and who had prolonged their suffering excessively? Sarah Graves, one of the survivors, was relentlessly pursued for interviews, as was Mary Murphy, who had tragically lost almost her entire family. Survivors found themselves ensnared between the conflicting forces of renown and ignominy, lauded for their endurance yet condemned for the means by which they had achieved it. James Reed, once a disgraced exile, returned to San Jose a profoundly altered man, perpetually haunted but ultimately vindicated. His resolute leadership during the rescue missions garnered him considerable public sympathy, and he dedicated a substantial portion of his later life to safeguarding the reputations of the survivors. Yet, even his earnest efforts couldn't completely quell the persistent whispers. Tamsin Donner tragically transformed into a poignant symbol of devotion, a loyal wife who steadfastly remained with her dying husband, repeatedly spurning opportunities for rescue. When she finally attempted to depart with a group of men, she vanished. Her ultimate fate remains shrouded in ambiguity. Some accounts suggest she succumbed to the bitter cold. Others darkly hinted that she had been murdered and consumed by the very men she had placed her trust in. Official silence and a cautionary tale. The government, for its part, maintained a conspicuous silence. California teetered on the precipice of becoming U.S. territory, and the last thing officials desired was to sully the idealized vision of westward expansion. The incident was summarily dismissed as an unfortunate calamity, a mere anomaly, no official inquiry, no formal investigation. And yet, in every parlor and saloon across the nation, whispers of the Donners persisted. The name itself became a stark cautionary tale. Children were admonished, don't take shortcuts. Don't stray from the trail, or you might end up like them. However, beneath the raw horror, something more profound and intricate lingered, unsettling questions about the very essence of survival, the fluidity of morality. And just how fragile the veneer of civilization truly becomes when the snow refuses to abate. For those who endured the Sierra Nevada nightmare, Their ordeal didn't conclude when the snow finally melted. Survival had extracted an exorbitant price. The lingering scars of survival, etched deeply into bone and memory. The survivors emerged from the mountains, yet they never truly left the horrors behind. Many were mere children. They re-entered civilization as spectral figures, quiet, underfed, with eyes widened by unspeakable experiences. Some, like Virginia Reed, then only 13, would go on to live long and seemingly ordinary lives. She eventually married, raised children, and even published her harrowing account in letters. But beneath her composed demeanor lay a trauma that throbbed like an old, unhealed wound. Others fared far worse. Mary Murphy, having lost her entire family, married young and tragically passed away within a few years. Louis Keseberg, a German immigrant among the last to be rescued, was forever stigmatized by pervasive rumors that he had not only consumed the deceased but had actively murdered them to ensure his own sustenance. He successfully sued a newspaper for libel, winning $1 in damages. It was a Pyrrhic victory, the indelible stain never truly faded. Some survivors attempted to vanish, altering their names, relocating far from California, or steadfastly refusing to discuss the events. Others were compelled to speak, haunted not merely by their own actions but by the terrifying spectacle of humanity's slow unraveling around them. It wasn't just the cannibalism, it was witnessing friends waste away into skeletons, hearing the silent anguish of mothers no longer able to nourish their children, and the agonizing choice of who to save when rescue finally arrived, knowing there was never enough room for all. Societal reactions and enduring guilt, crafted for public comfort rather than unvarnished historical truth. The persistent, uncomfortable truth. Each year, schoolchildren visit the site. They are presented with the abridged version. Pioneers, trapped, survived. Perhaps a fleeting mention of starvation. Rarely the full, unvarnished account. It's considerably easier to honor sheer grit than to confront the true, agonizing cost of survival. Still, the mountains remember. The paths they traversed are still there, now buried beneath ski resorts and scenic hiking trails. The precise spot where Tamsin Donner chose to remain with her dying husband is now a serene picnic area. The frozen cabin where children wept in silent despair has been replaced by interpretive plaques. And yet, the very air feels heavy. As if the ground still retains the echo of boots crunching through snow, of mothers gently rocking lifeless infants, of strangers sharing sustenance with trembling hands and averted eyes. Nature remains indifferent, it offers no apologies. But the story persists, not merely because it is horrifying, but because it is profoundly human. The Donner Party was not solely about failure or the ultimate taboo of cannibalism. It was a harrowing testament to the extremes people will reach to protect their families. To desperately cling to hope, to choose life, even in its most abhorrent forms. And in the profound silence of those mountains, that excruciating choice still resonates. The evolution of a national narrative. In the decades that followed, the saga of the Donner Party evolved, distorted by selective memory, contorted by salacious gossip, and reshaped by the insatiable demands of a nation addicted to dramatic narratives. The raw facts were sufficiently gruesome, yet that did not deter storytellers from exaggerating them further, or, in some instances, from casting them in a more heroic light. Some survivors were romanticized, portrayed as tragic pioneers who had stared into the abyss of hell and returned bearing the indelible scars of their ordeal. Others, like Louis Keseberg, were demonized in the public imagination. He was accused of hoarding food, of murdering Tamsin Donner, and of reveling in the unspeakable acts he committed to survive. None of these accusations were definitively proven. But truth. In the nascent age of printing presses and sensationalized dime novels, was rarely the primary concern. The public craved extremes, they desired martyrs or monsters. Not the complexities of human desperation. This relentless scrutiny made life after survival extraordinarily difficult. Every interview, every crude newspaper sketch, every fictionalized retelling reopened deep, festering wounds. Some survivors valiantly attempted to set the record straight. Years later, Virginia Reed courageously published her own meticulous account, imploring future pioneers to eschew shortcuts and heed the wisdom of experienced guides. Others remained stoically silent, utterly worn down by the immense weight of their memories and the world's morbid fascination with them. By the late 19th century, the Donner Party had solidified into folklore. It became a cautionary tale whispered in hushed tones around campfires, a grim lesson imparted to schoolchildren, a potent metaphor for disastrous planning, for hubris, and for the calamitous consequences of trusting misguided advice. The Hastings cutoff became infamous, a chilling synonym for fatal shortcuts. And, over time, the most horrifying aspect of the story, the cannibalism, was often used to overshadow the deeper, more profound tragedy, that the entire ordeal could have been entirely averted. That poor leadership, arrogant promises, and systemic inexperience claimed more lives than the snow ever did. A complex American symbol. Yet, there is something uniquely American in the persistence of this tale. It is not merely a story of failure, it is a narrative deeply intertwined, ultimately melted and time relentlessly marched forward, the chilling question never truly faded. What would you have done? Today, the Donner Party stands as more than a mere footnote in American history. It is a symbol, distorted, hotly debated, and profoundly uncomfortable. Unlike other narratives of pioneering grit, this one stubbornly refuses to fit neatly into the sanitized gallery of noble westward expansion. It is a story that still bites. We remember the cannibalism, yes, but that was only the harrowing final act. The true legacy lies in every factor that inexorably led to it, the deceptive illusion of shortcuts, the deadly power of incompetent leadership, the misplaced faith bestowed upon maps drawn by dreamers instead of pragmatic realists. The Donner Party brutally exposed the inherent fragility of the American dream when confronted by the harsh, unyielding indifference of nature, the enduring echoes of resilience. And yet, within that catastrophic collapse, we also discover something else: endurance. The survivors didn't merely descend from the mountains, they rebuilt their lives, married, and had children. Some remained in California, others relocated far away to escape the pervasive whispers. A select few even achieved quiet prosperity. Their lives were not defined by what they had been compelled to do to survive, but by their resolute choice to continue living afterward. However, the cost of that survival remains eternal. The site at Donner Lake still stands, preserved and somber. Visitors walk among the tall pine trees and the lingering patches of melting snow, reading plaques that speak of hunger and courage. Tour guides speak in hushed, reverent tones. Historians continue to debate the intricate details. Writers, even today, cannot relinquish the story because the Donner Party compels us to ask questions that history often avoids. What happens when every remaining option is the very one you swore you would never choose? What happens when the dream of paradise transmutes into a snowy tomb? And if mere survival is all that remains, does it still matter how you achieve it? There are no wholly satisfying answers. Only echoes and bones interred beneath the snow. In the final analysis, the Donner Party serves as a stark reminder that human strength is not measured in glory, but in unyielding resolve, not in conquest, but in the brutal, terrifying choice to simply keep breathing, even when every comfort, every law, and every comforting illusion of civilization has been brutally stripped away. So, we remember them not just for what they did, but for the unfathomable depths of what they endured. Not as abstract legends or grim cautionary tales, but as human beings, terrified, resolute, flawed, and profoundly human. And in the Sierra winds, their story continues to whisper through the rustling trees, eternally frozen in time, forever incomplete. Wu Zetian, Ambition in Silk. Wu Zhao was not born into royal lineage. She was born into something far more perilous, ambition cloaked in the finest silk. The year was 624 CE, and the Tang dynasty was in its nascent stages, radiating with promise and poetic elegance. Her father, a prosperous timber merchant, afforded his daughters exceptional privileges, tutors, extensive libraries, and the revolutionary notion that a girl's intellect could be as incisive as any boy's sword. From her earliest years, Wu Zhao distinguished herself. While her female contemporaries diligently perfected embroidery and the art of humble tea pouring, Wu immersed herself in the intricacies of politics, history, and classical literature. She was captivated by she meticulously studied the mechanics of power, how it was wielded, and more importantly, how it was irrevocably lost. When Emperor Taizong's health began to decline, Wu Zhao remained unperturbed. She meticulously planned. Upon his demise, established protocol dictated that she should be dispatched to a Buddhist convent, effectively ending her public life. But fate, or more accurately, Wu Zhao's shrewd cunning, had orchestrated an alternative trajectory. She had already captivated the attention of the emperor's son, Li Ji, the future emperor Gaozong, and he had not forgotten her. What transpired next was the inaugural act in a lengthy succession of subtle, yet profound, revolutions. Wu Zhao was no longer just a concubine, she was a diligent student of power, and soon she would become its undisputed master. The young woman once concealed behind a palace screen would ultimately ascend to become the formidable figure who reigned from the majestic dragon throne. Yet, her ascent had only just commenced, and the vast empire was utterly unprepared for the seismic shifts that were about to unfold. The return from the convent and the rise to empress. When Emperor Taizong passed away in 649 CE, strict palace protocol dictated Wu Zhao's immediate future with chilling clarity. She was to be exiled to a convent, destined to live out her remaining days with a shaven head and in quiet contemplation. Most former concubines accepted this fate with serene resignation. Wu Zhao, however, was not like most. Prior to Taizong's death, she had already initiated a subtle and perilous liaison with his son, Li Ji, who would soon become the new Emperor Gaozong. Whether fueled by genuine affection or ruthless calculation, their clandestine bond survived the fraught transition of power. And so, barely a year after her forced entry into the convent, Wu Zhao made a dramatic return, not as a discarded widow, but as the emperor's secret consort. Ironically, Empress Wang, Gaozong's official wife, had unwittingly facilitated Wu Zhao's re-entry into the palace. Her misguided hope was to divert the emperor's attention from another burgeoning rival concubine. She might as well have personally handed Wu Zhao the keys to the entire empire. Wu Zhao inhabited her new role with chilling grace and calculated precision. She bore the emperor several sons, a crucial advantage no rival could hope to match. But she didn't merely provide him with heirs, she offered him ideas. It wasn't long before she established herself as his most trusted advisor, subtly injecting notions that gradually reshaped the machinery of state policy and the intricate etiquette of the court. Some whispered that the emperor was utterly infatuated. Others murmured he was under a potent spell. Regardless, she had become utterly indispensable. The empress's ruthless assent. Then came the inevitable shedding of blood. The escalating rivalry between Empress Wang and another favored concubine, Consort Xiao, escalated into a quiet, yet brutal, war. In 654 CE, tragedy struck, or, more accurately, was orchestrated. Wu Zhao's infant daughter perished under highly suspicious circumstances. She immediately accused Empress Wang of murder. What followed was swift and utterly ruthless. Wang and Xiao were summarily deposed, imprisoned, and eventually subjected to horrific mutilation. Empress Wang's limbs were severed, and her tongue excised. Her final screams, it was chillingly recounted, resembled the cries of a pig being slaughtered. Wu Zhao was now the empress, officially. This was not merely an ascent, it was a coup d'état disguised as destiny. Wu Zhao had transitioned from a mere concubine to the empress, not through military might, but through carefully cultivated alliances, strategic assassinations, and the relentless erosion of her enemy's influence. She didn't just survive palace life, she bent it decisively to her will. But she was far from finished. Not even close. She had tasted true power. Now, she coveted the throne itself, not alongside the emperor, but decisively above him. And for the very first time in China's lengthy and profoundly patriarchal history, that previously unthinkable dream would begin its inexorable transformation into reality. The silent puppeteer and the quest for the throne. By the late 660s, Empress Wu was no longer a mere consort who offered whispered counsel from behind a scene. Initially, Wu Zhao exercised her newfound authority with calculated prudence. She strategically endorsed Buddhism over the entrenched Confucian order, skillfully utilized a woman guide the vast empire. It was a form of spiritual logic infused with formidable political teeth. She meticulously restructured the bureaucracy, promoting officials based on demonstrable merit rather than aristocratic lineage, a truly revolutionary act in a court overwhelmingly dominated by entrenched aristocratic bloodlines. To her burgeoning faction of supporters, she was a visionary reformer. To her numerous enemies, she was a social arsonist, deliberately igniting fires that threatened centuries of cherished tradition. Consolidating power and the end of male rule. Nevertheless, Wu Zhao masterfully played the long game. She never rushed the throne. Instead, she patiently waited, systematically eliminating rivals, diligently cultivating loyal allies, and thoroughly mastering the intricate language of statecraft. She strategically planted informants like seeds throughout the vast bureaucracy. She wielded the imperial secret police with the precision of pruning shears. Any official who dared to oppose her found themselves summarily demoted, exiled, or executed. All while she outwardly maintained a facade of unwavering dutifulness to the ailing emperor. In 683, Emperor Gaozong passed away. The established natural order dictated the restoration of male rule. Their son, Li Xian, Emperor Zhongzong, ascended the throne. However, when he displayed alarming signs of independence, daring to appoint his maternal in-laws to significant positions, Wu Zhao immediately struck. She swiftly demoted him and installed another son, Li Dan, Emperor Ruizong, one who was demonstrably more pliable and easily controlled. From her position behind the throne, she exercised absolute rule as Empress Dowager and Regent. It was the quintessential disguise for absolute authority. A compassionate mother ostensibly safeguarding the empire in her son's name. The unthinkable, a female emperor. But soon, even the thinly veiled fiction of male rule began to chafe. Why maintain this charade any longer, the grumbling ministers muttered. The court scribes whispered in hushed tones, warning, China has never had a female emperor. It would be unnatural. Wu Zhao listened intently. Then, with quiet determination, she began to orchestrate the preparation for a new name, a new dynasty, and a wholly unprecedented chapter in history where the emperor would wear a crown adorned with phoenixes, not dragons. She was no longer content to wield power from the encompassing shadows. She was utterly prepared to lay claim to the dazzling light of absolute rule. In 690 CE, Wu Zhao finally cast aside the last vestiges of veiled authority. No more proxies. No more sons seated on the throne with her guiding hand subtly positioned behind their backs. She boldly declared the definitive end of the Tang dynasty and proclaimed the auspicious birth of a new regime, the Zhou dynasty, ruthlessly crushing any nascent dissent before it had the slightest chance to take root. To further solidify her mandate, she leaned heavily upon Buddhism. Temples were grandly constructed across the vast empire, proclaiming her as the living reincarnation of Maitreya, the future Buddha. One particularly opportunistic monk even discovered a scripture unequivocally declaring that a woman would one day rule the entire world and usher in an era of universal peace. Conveniently, that very woman was now occupying the dragon throne. She commissioned portraits of herself, depicting her seated on the throne with serene authority, and had inscriptions carved in stone that lauded her as a divine monarch. In a profoundly patriarchal society, such actions were nothing short of heresy. And yet, remarkably, it worked. Wu Zhao governed with a masterful blend of steel and silk. She substantially strengthened the civil service examination system, ensuring that bureaucrats were selected based on demonstrable ability rather than inherited birthright. She implemented comprehensive agricultural reforms, significantly alleviating the burdens on farmers, and consequentially boosting state revenue. Under her astute reign, the empire largely maintained remarkable stability and prosperity. However, her formidable power came with a considerable price. She relied heavily on a pervasive secret police network that sniffed out dissent like the fragrant smoke of incense in a temple. Court intrigues intensified dramatically. Critics vanished without a trace. Whispers of summary executions, forced suicides, and terrifying torture chambers circulated like a dark, noxious incense behind the imposing palace walls. Even so, she reigned with an almost audacious grace. She wore the resplendent dragon robe. She granted imperial audiences with unwavering confidence. She issued decrees under her own unchallenged name. For 15 formidable years, Wu Zhao was not merely the most powerful woman in China, she was, unequivocally, the most powerful person. She had ascended every rung of a ladder she was never intended to even touch. And now she stood entirely alone at its apex. The cost of power and enduring legacy. Ruling China as its sole female emperor brought unparalleled prestige. However, it also rendered Wu Zhao the direct focal point of every simmering grudge, every deep-seated fear, and every wounded ego across the vast empire. She had dared to rewrite entrenched tradition, brazenly defied the established Confucian order, and skillfully outmaneuvered generations of entrenched noblemen. And that singular achievement meant one thing: every person cloaked in silk was meticulously observing her, patiently awaiting her downfall. The court seethed with a quiet, simmering rebellion. Ministers who bowed with apparent deference by day conspired furtively by candlelight at night. Even among her own children, there was no true sanctuary. The very sons she had once manipulated as pawns began to resent her absolute, unyielding control. They craved power for themselves. But Wu Zhao had inadvertently taught them too effectively just how perilous ambition could be. She trusted none of them to survive her absolute dominance. Wu Zhao didn't merely govern. She engaged in a relentless, high-stakes game of psychological chess. Suspected conspirators were summarily removed under vague, often unsubstantiated, charges. Trials were swift. Confessions frequently coerced, and executions were brutally public. Her enemies painted her as a bloodthirsty tyrant. In truth, however, her methods were surgically precise. This was not madness. It was a cold, calculated method. She ingeniously created new ranks within the bureaucracy, titles that sounded grand but conferred negligible actual power. It was her clever means of rewarding loyalty without relinquishing genuine control. She also significantly elevated the status of women at court, strategically placing female relatives and trusted concubines into positions that would have been utterly inconceivable a mere generation prior. Yet, as the years progressed, her growing reliance on a select few key figures began to cast an unfavorable light upon her otherwise remarkable legacy. Two particular favorites, the Zhang brothers, soared from mere court entertainers to powerful political insiders. Handsome, charismatic, and decades her junior, they swiftly gained her favor and, with it, immense influence. To her detractors, this was nothing short of scandalous. The Empress, once celebrated for her incisive intellect and unyielding command, was now perceived as a solitary woman desperately clinging to youth through the company of fawning courtiers. Whispers of corruption and rampant decadence began to proliferate throughout the palace. However, these insidious murmurs couldn't erase her undeniable accomplishments. Under her rule, literacy expanded significantly, civil service examinations were rigorously reformed, and state infrastructure witnessed considerable improvement. She hadn't merely ruled, she had governed with remarkable effectiveness. Still, her health inevitably began to decline. Her formidable grip on power, though outwardly firm, was perceptibly weakening. And behind her, opportunists circled like vultures, eagerly anticipating a return to normalcy. Xi and Zhang Changzong became a potent source of widespread ridicule and resentment. Once charming favorites, they were now universally viewed as corrupt sycophants who brazenly manipulated imperial decisions for their own venal gain. Ministers who had long tolerated their presence now began to actively conspire. In 705 CE, the palace finally reached its breaking point. A formidable contingent of senior officials and generals launched a swift and decisive coup. It wasn't particularly bloody, it didn't need to be. The Empress was swiftly surrounded, her remaining allies captured, and the Zhang brothers were summarily executed, their severed heads publicly displayed to the court as an unmistakable signal. The phoenix's wings had been decisively clipped, erasing the Empress, preserving the legacy. Faced with overwhelming pressure and rapidly deteriorating health, Wu Zhao had no alternative but to abdicate. She was compelled to step down and restore her son, Li Xian, Emperor Zhongzong, to the throne, the very same son she had previously removed for daring to entertain independent thoughts. She retreated into forced retirement, her once vast and opulent court diminished to a small, loyal entourage. And yet, even in abdication, she remarkably retained her imperial title and continued to exert a degree of influence behind closed doors. China may have changed the name on its throne, but the indelible echo of Wu Zhao's transformative reign still lingered in every policy, every law, and within every shaken official. Forever wary of another woman with formidable ideas, she passed away later that same year. There was no grand tomb inscription, no elaborate, flowery epitaph. Her name was quietly expunged from official historical records. The Tang dynasty painstakingly attempted to erase her as thoroughly as possible. As if her entire reign had been a bad dream. She is a mirror. In her meteoric rise, one discerns the grinding gears of systemic injustice, and in her transformative reign, the precise moment those gears were decisively jammed. She didn't just defy expectations. She utterly obliterated them. And yet, she also paid the inevitable price of greatness. Her legacy remains clouded by significant moral ambiguity. She employed fear as much as fairness. Her enemies died not merely in disgrace but sometimes without fair trial, their voices irrevocably lost to history. Her compassion was selective, her justice strategic. She was not a saint, but she was never attempting to be one. Wu Zhao ruled not to be liked, but to survive. And in surviving, she fundamentally made history. And so, she remains. The woman emperor who emerged from the shadows of concubinage, who strode into a world that vehemently said, no, and answered with an unassailable throne. In a land traditionally ruled by dragons, she crowned herself the phoenix. And in that very flame, she burned her name into eternity. The power of roads, a declaration of control. In the ancient world, a road was far more than a mere convenience for travel. It was an unequivocal declaration of power. The instant a ruler decreed that a road be meticulously carved through dense forest, arid desert, or formidable mountain ranges, the intention was not merely ease of passage. It was about absolute control. Roads were, in essence, empire in motion. Unlike natural waterways or vast oceans, whose courses were dictated by nature. Roads were deliberate human impositions. They boldly bisected geographies, seamlessly tethered distant outposts to central capitals, and served as a constant, tangible reminder to everyone, from humble merchant to aspiring rebel, that civilization possessed an undeniable and far-reaching grasp. A well-constructed road ensured that troops could mobilize with exceptional speed, taxes could be collected with formidable efficiency, and valuable goods from the far-flung frontiers could be effortlessly transported to the very heart of the empire. The earliest known pathways date back to Mesopotamia, roughly 4000 BCE. These were not sophisticated paved highways, but rather compacted earthen tracks utilized by rudimentary carts and trading convoys. Even in those nascent societies, a crucial realization emerged. When people traverse the land, ideas, goods, and cultural influence move in tandem, and whoever constructs the route fundamentally controls this vital flow. In ancient Persia, the celebrated royal road spanned over 1,600 miles from Sardis to Susa. It was outfitted with weighing stations, designated rest areas, and a system of swift royal couriers who could gallop across the vast empire in unprecedented time. Herodotus famously asserted that a critical message could traverse its entire length in merely 7 days. This remarkable speed wasn't just impressive, it was profoundly intimidating. It signified that the monarch's directives could reach every remote corner of the empire within days, not weeks, consolidating central authority. Roman roads, the arteries of empire. However, it was the Romans who truly perfected the road as an instrument of imperial power. They constructed an astounding 50,000 miles of stone-paved roads across Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East. These thoroughfares were remarkably straight, exceptionally durable, and astonishingly well-engineered. Their design prioritized efficiency above aesthetic appeal. Marching legions, vital grain shipments, and imperial messengers all relied heavily on the steadfast stone beneath their feet. While Roman roads often originated with military objectives in mind, their civilian impact proved equally transformative. Farmers could efficiently transport their produce to bustling markets. Travelers could traverse vast regions with a newfound sense of safety. Cities became interconnected not solely by political decrees, but by networks of meticulously laid stone and the sheer toil of countless laborers. In virtually every significant civilization, the road transcended mere transportation, it became an agent of profound transformation. To construct a road was to fundamentally reshape the physical landscape, and in doing so, to redefine the power that governed it. If the ancient world harbored an engineering superpower, it was undoubtedly Rome. And their most potent instrument wasn't solely the aqueduct or the arch. It was the road. Roman roads were not simply pathways, they were the very skeletal structure of an empire. The logistical brilliance of Roman construction. The idiom, "all roads lead to Rome," was not a mere figure of speech, it was a precise logistical reality. The Romans meticulously built over 50,000 miles of roads, characterized by expertly laid stone, superior drainage systems, and an unswerving straightness. These arterial routes connected distant Britain to the sands of Egypt, linked the Rhine to the Danube, and seamlessly integrated every crucial military outpost in between. These roads effectively made the sprawling empire feel considerably smaller, swifter, and far more manageable. Roman engineers adhered to a precise construction formula. First, they meticulously selected a route, not always the path of least resistance, but frequently the most direct. Then came the rigorous surveying phase, employing sophisticated tools like the groma for accurate right angles and precise distance measurements. Once the trajectory was definitively established, excavation commenced. A Roman road was meticulously constructed in layers, much like a monumental cake of conquest. The foundational layer, known as statumen, comprised large, unworked stones. Above this came the rudis, a robust mixture of crushed stone and lime mortar. Next was the nucleus, a compacted layer of sand or fine gravel. Finally, the summa dorsum, the paved top. Consisted of tightly interlocking stone slabs, often purposefully crowned in the center to facilitate efficient water runoff. The culmination of this intricate process was a road capable of withstanding centuries of inclement weather, countless hooves, and untold numbers of sandals. Remarkably, some segments are still in active use today. Beyond engineering, infrastructure and imperial reach. However, engineering prowess represented only half of the narrative. Roman roads were invariably accompanied by comprehensive infrastructure, strategically placed mile markers, convenient rest stops, and official way stations known as mansions, where imperial officials and urgent messengers could find respite and resupply. The cursus publicus, Rome's highly organized courier system, leveraged these roads to transmit critical messages across the empire with astonishing rapidity, occasionally achieving speeds of nearly 50 miles per day. Yet, the roads transported more than mere mail, they moved legions. A nascent rebellion in Gaul, a localized skirmish in Judea, Roman troops could march hundreds of miles faster than any adversary anticipated. Roads became a seamless extension of Rome's formidable military might, silent, unwavering, and perpetually advancing. But where soldiers marched, settlers soon followed, and with settlers came burgeoning cities. Roads actively fostered trade, encouraged migration, and facilitated the widespread dissemination of Roman law, language, and architectural styles. They functioned as vital arteries, pumping culture as vigorously as they propagated conquest. For Rome, a road was not an opulent luxury, it was an absolute necessity, a powerful symbol, a profound message carved in stone that declared, Rome is here. And wherever Rome built, the world beneath their mighty feet underwent a fundamental transformation. The Inca road system, stitching the sky. While Rome meticulously laid stone in Europe, the Inca Empire audaciously built their grand thoroughfares in the sky. Stretching over an astonishing 25,000 miles, the Capac Nan, the magnificent Inca road system, stood as a supreme marvel of Andean engineering. It intricately interconnected one of the planet's most formidable and challenging landscapes, linking parched deserts, dense jungles, and towering mountains that soared past 13,000 feet. And the Inca accomplished this monumental feat entirely without the use of the wheel, without draft animals beyond the agile llama, and without metal tools in the European sense. This was not merely a road system, it was the very spine of an empire. At the strategic heart of this vast network lay Cusco, the imperial Inca capital. Radiating outwards like the spokes of a sun, the roads seamlessly linked provincial centers, military outposts, vital agricultural hubs, and sacred ceremonial sites. The most renowned segment is undoubtedly the Inca Trail, which meanders its way to the iconic Machu Picchu. However, this was merely one intricate thread in a far more extensive imperial tapestry. The roads themselves varied considerably in their scale and construction. In the lowlands, they were broad and meticulously paved with cut stone. In the dizzying high mountains, they narrowed to perilous paths cut directly into sheer cliffs, sometimes no more than a foot wide, where formidable rivers blocked passage. The Inca ingeniously constructed rope suspension bridges using expertly woven grasses, strong enough to bear the weight of travelers and caravans of llamas. These vital bridges required annual reconstruction, a profound community ritual that remarkably persists in parts of Peru even today. Officiation was deeply symbolic. Every step reinforced the imperial order and the delicate balance of religious harmony. The Capac Nan was not a Roman-style machine of conquest, it was a resilient tether. A sophisticated means to bind a vertically sprawling empire together. From snow-capped Andean peaks to arid coastal deserts, the roads made unity an astonishing possibility. And though much of it has vanished today, some sections still endure, stones meticulously fitted without mortar, still bearing the faint imprint of footsteps after 5 centuries. The Inca did not merely conquer the Andes, they painstakingly stitched it together, one vital pathway at a time. The Persian Royal Road. A blueprint for efficiency. Centuries before the monumental Roman efforts and far removed from the towering Andean peaks. Another vast empire strategically stitched together its expansive territory with stone and sophisticated planning, the Achaemenid Persian Empire. At its very heart ran the legendary Royal Road. A remarkable 1,500-mile engineering triumph stretching from Sardis in Lydia, modern-day Turkey, to Susa, one of the primary Persian capitals. Commissioned by Darius the Great in the 5th century BCE. The Royal Road was more than just a conduit for moving goods, it was a vital political artery, a tangible demonstration of imperial sophistication. And one of the earliest true long-distance highways ever recorded in history. The Persians may not have invented roads, but they rigorously standardized them, militarized them, and transformed them into the fundamental backbone of their bureaucracy. Their skilled engineers meticulously scouted routes that balanced rugged terrain with directness, carefully avoiding treacherous swamps and bravely scaling mountains when absolutely necessary. The outcome was a surprisingly smooth and remarkably fast connection spanning a vast, continent-sized empire. Herodotus famously recorded that royal messengers could traverse the entire length of the Royal Road in a mere 7 days, a journey that would have typically consumed approximately 90 days for an ordinary traveler. How was this astonishing speed achieved? Through an ingenious system of relay stations. Every 15 to 18 miles, strategically placed posting stations provided fresh horses and vital supplies. Couriers would swiftly switch mounts and continue riding at top speed, a sophisticated system that remarkably foreshadowed the American Pony Express by over 2 millennia. Beyond messengers, trade, control, and lasting influence. However, these roads were not exclusively for urgent messengers. Merchants, military units, diplomats, and tax collectors utilized them constantly. The Royal Road played a crucial role in knitting together a vast, multi-ethnic empire that encompassed diverse peoples, including Greeks, Medes, Egyptians, Babylonians, and many more. It facilitated something truly extraordinary in the ancient world: central oversight of distant provinces. Road guards ensured constant safety, and strategically placed caravanserais provided shelter and provisions for travelers. The entire system relied heavily on meticulous maintenance and stringent order, 2 areas in which the Persian bureaucracy demonstrably excelled. Dedicated road crews were regularly deployed to repair any damage, and tolls were sometimes collected at strategic river crossings or narrow mountain passes. The Persians also pioneered the use of road markers and milestones, essential tools for accurately measuring distance and ensuring consistency across diverse regions. These pioneering practices would later echo in the advanced road networks of Rome and Byzantium. The Royal Road did not survive the eventual fall of Persia entirely intact, but its profound influence lingered. Alexander the Great famously utilized it during his invasion of the empire. The Romans, in turn, later expanded upon its foundational concept. Even today, modern highways in the region follow segments of its ancient route. It powerfully demonstrated one undeniable idea: an empire is not ruled by the sword alone. It is ruled by the speed of a message and the underlying strength of the road upon which it travels. Han Dynasty China. The Silk Road's foundation. While the Romans meticulously laid stone in Europe and the Incas painstakingly carved trails through the Andes, another vast empire was quietly constructing a comprehensive road network that would profoundly uniformly stone-paved Roman roads. Han roads were not always constructed with such consistent engineering. Many consisted of hard-packed dirt or gravel, occasionally reinforced with sturdy planks in marshy regions or solid stone slabs in areas of high traffic. But what they might have lacked in uniform engineering, they more than compensated for in sheer scale and meticulous organization. The postal relay system, famously known as the Ichwan, was remarkably sophisticated. Stations were strategically placed at regular intervals, complete with fresh horses and comfortable accommodations for government messengers. This efficient system allowed imperial decrees and crucial tax records to traverse thousands of miles with surprising rapidity. These roads supported not only effective governance but also critical diplomacy and burgeoning trade. Envoys like Zhang Qian, who embarked on arduous journeys westward into Central Asia, bravely opened up contact with diverse cultures as far as Persia and India. Silk, jade, paper, and valuable spices flowed outwards from China. In return, China received highly prized horses, exquisite glassware, and new agricultural concepts. Security was paramount. The Han dynasty heavily invested in maintaining robust military garrisons along these crucial routes, especially near the Heshi, Gansu, corridor, a narrow, windswept strip of land that served as a vital gateway between China and the burgeoning West. Watchtowers, signal mounds, and fortified settlements peppered these routes, forming a grid of imperial authority. Culturally, this road system facilitated the dissemination of Confucianism, Buddhism, and sophisticated administrative practices across diverse territories. Travelers, monks, soldiers, and merchants carried ideas along with their merchandise, fostering a cohesive identity that would endure long after the Han dynasty's demise. Han roads weren't built for ostentation, they were constructed for durability. And while many were eventually subsumed by later urban developments or reclaimed by the relentless forces of dust and desert, their profound legacy persisted. Because through these meticulously engineered roads, China didn't merely defend its borders, it decisively opened a gateway to the wider world. The Greeks. Paths to culture and identity. The ancient Greeks are seldom lauded for their expansive road networks. They didn't construct magnificent highways akin to the Romans or vast interconnected systems like the Persians. However, the pathways they did build, though more modest in scope, vividly illustrate how roads could shape not only commerce and warfare but also culture, religious practices, and collective identity. Greece's rugged, mountainous topography rendered road construction both challenging and exorbitantly expensive. Consequently, instead of sprawling imperial highways, the Greeks developed a mosaic of stone-paved local routes, frequently linking independent city-states rather than attempting to unify a sprawling empire. These roads judiciously followed the natural contours of the land and were typically narrow, just wide enough to accommodate pack animals or chariots. Yet, despite their relative simplicity, they played an indispensable role. Shrines and inscribed stones marked the path, transforming it into a spiritual pilgrimage as much as a physical trek. But Greek roads weren't exclusively sacred. They were traversed by soldiers, profound philosophers, and industrious traders. Consider Xenophon's Anabasis, which vividly chronicles the arduous retreat of Greek mercenaries through Persia, a brutal, road-bound odyssey. Or imagine Socrates, who frequently walked from the agora to the academy or the lyceum to impart his wisdom under the open sky, his feet tracing worn paths of dialogue and debate. What truly distinguished Greek roads wasn't their engineering grandeur, but their seamless integration into daily life. They weren't constructed by emperors to assert dominance. They emerged organically, shaped by the ebb and flow of marketplaces, the solemnity of sanctuaries, and the vibrancy of social rituals. And through them, profound ideas traveled just as swiftly as soldiers or carts. Philosophy, theatrical arts, the nascent concept of democracy, and even Olympic athletes, all moved along these dusty, narrow roads that wound through olive groves and city gates. Simple as they were, Greek roads bore the immense weight of a civilization that fundamentally altered the world, not through brute force, but through profound thought. Ancient India, arteries of faith and governance. In ancient India, roads transcended mere channels of commerce, they functioned as vital arteries of spiritual life, imperial governance, and multifaceted cultural exchange. From the Mauryan Empire in the 3rd century BCE to the later Gupta rule, Indian civilizations developed a remarkably organized road network that linked fertile river valleys, bustling coastal ports, thriving trade towns, and revered holy cities. The most transformative period for ancient Indian roads occurred under Emperor Ashoka, the Buddhist monarch who presided over most of the subcontinent from approximately 268 to 232 BCE. After renouncing violence following the devastating Kalinga War, Ashoka dedicated himself to public welfare, and roads became a central feature of this profound transformation. Ashoka commanded the construction and expansion of roads across his vast empire. These were not merely dirt paths, they were deliberately engineered routes, frequently lined with shade-giving trees. Equipped with wells for water, and furnished with rest houses for weary travelers. He strategically placed inscribed stone pillars along these roads, not primarily to denote distances, but to publicly declare edicts urging compassion, truthfulness, and profound religious tolerance. This was, in essence, governance through pervasive visibility. The most celebrated of these roads stretched from Pataliputra, modern-day Patna, to the northwest frontier, connecting the fertile Ganges plain to present-day Pakistan and Afghanistan. This segment later became an integral part of the northern trade route that would evolve into the legendary Silk Road, linking India to distant China, Persia, and the Greco-Roman world. Indian roads conveyed more than just commodities, they transported faiths and philosophical tenets. Buddhist monks traversed these routes to propagate their teachings. Hindu pilgrims utilized them to journey between sacred rivers and revered temples. Even wandering sages embarked on these paths in quiet contemplation. The roads thus became profound bridges between ideas. Trade flourished. From the eastern coast, valuable goods like spices, textiles, ivory, and gems moved inland and outwards, eventually reaching Roman ports and Central Asian markets. Roads connected vibrant urban centers such as Taxila, Ujjain, and Varanasi, each a dynamic hub of commerce and scholarly pursuit. Although many ancient Indian roads were not paved with stone like their Roman counterparts, they were meticulously maintained seasonally, especially prior to the monsoon rains. Engineers employed gravel, sturdy wood planks, and compacted earth, often slightly elevated to prevent destructive flooding. What distinguished India's ancient road system was not brute force but its inherent plurality. Roads served kings, farmers, saints, and scholars alike. They didn't just connect empires. They connected entire worldviews. And in that rich blend of purpose, part political, part spiritual, part economic, India paved not merely roads, but pathways to influence that would stretch far beyond its geographical borders. Engineering marvels, bridges, drainage, and durability. Ancient roads were not simply flat paths traversing the landscape. They were astounding feats of engineering that successfully overcame formidable rivers, deep ravines, and rugged terrain. To construct truly effective roads, civilizations had to master the intricate arts of bridge building, efficient drainage, and durable construction. The Romans were undeniable pioneers in bridge engineering. Their roads frequently spanned vast rivers using magnificent stone arch bridges. Structures robust enough to support immense loads and endure for centuries. The Ponte Fabricio in Rome and the Alcantara Bridge in Spain stand as prime examples. The Roman arch, utilizing precisely cut keystones, masterfully distributed weight, ensuring remarkable stability. Their bridges were not merely utilitarian, they were powerful symbols of imperial might. Inspiring awe and profound, binding communities to their land and to each other. In ancient China, engineers independently developed innovative beam bridges and pontoon bridges. The renowned Anji Bridge, or Zhaozhou Bridge, constructed during the Sui dynasty and completed in 605 CE, stands as the world's oldest open spandrel stone segmental arch bridge. It harmoniously combined aesthetic grace with remarkable engineering prowess, allowing heavy traffic to traverse the Jiao River for centuries. Drainage was equally critical for road longevity. Roman roads were purposefully crowned in the center to swiftly shed rainwater. with meticulously dug ditches on either side. In the wet and monsoon-prone lands of India and Southeast Asia, roads were often elevated on causeways or filled with carefully layered gravel to prevent devastating washouts. Some empires even constructed roads using multiple layers of materials, compacted soil, various sizes of stones, gravel, and paving slabs, to ensure unparalleled durability and resilience. Beyond transit. The enduring legacy of ancient roads. Beyond the physical structures of bridges and drainage systems, the establishment of way stations and mile markers along ancient roads provided travelers with essential rest, vital supplies, and accurate orientation, serving as early versions of what we now recognize as highway rest stops. These engineering achievements didn't just facilitate movement, they fundamentally shaped economies, warfare, and cultural exchange. A well-placed bridge could signify the difference between an army successfully invading enemy territory and being abruptly halted. A meticulously maintained road could ensure the very survival of a city through reliable trade and consistent communication. Ultimately, the engineering behind ancient roads was a profound expression of human ingenuity, a testament to how societies adapted to and actively reshaped their environments to efficiently move people, goods, and ideas across vast and varied landscapes. Throughout history, ancient roads were more than mere pathways, they were the lifelines that enabled empires to flourish, expand, and endure. Roads seamlessly connected distant cities with remote villages, rebellion, or succumb to decline. But roads also profoundly symbolize human ambition, the innate desire to connect, to control, and to communicate across immense spaces. They reveal how early engineers and visionary leaders perceived geography not merely as an obstacle but as a malleable canvas to be reshaped. Today, many ancient roads lie beneath our modern highways, while others endure as invaluable archaeological treasures. They across the vast expanses of time and space.